So we are going to spend 6 weeks talking about the cross and the resurrection. And you might think, well, don't we always talk about the cross and the resurrection? And the answer is yes. We always talk about the cross and the resurrection. So perhaps some of you have a reaction to that inside. You don't let it out, but you have a reaction to that. Maybe something like I did a lot of times when I was younger. When I was younger, and after I'd been in church for a little while, and I'd heard people talk about the cross and the resurrection a million times, I would have a certain thought when a pastor would start sharing the gospel again. And that thought would be something like this. I would hear the pastor saying, "Let me tell you some good news." And I would think, he's saying, "Let me tell you some good news that I've already heard a million times." It seemed sometimes boring to me, as if I didn't need to hear it again. I was approaching the Bible and the message of Jesus kind of like you would approach a subject in school, right? You learn how to do math, you learn how to do your addition, and wouldn't it be boring if you came back to math class every time, year after year, and all you studied was the same addition? You never moved on. That would be really boring, wouldn't it? That's not what the cross is like at all. So I'm going to try and convince you of this with an illustration today. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to break the boringness, because the boringness of the cross, if that's how you ever experience it, does not have to do with the cross itself. It has to do with two things. Why is it boring? When the cross or the gospel seems boring to me, I will suggest or submit to you that it's for two reasons. The first reason is it could be that the person speaking is failing to make it plain. You're going to see as we go through this series, Paul has in 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, and Galatians, those are the books of the Bible we'll be in, Paul has a very strong focus on getting rid of anything that might distract us and making the cross of Christ very clear, very plain, very obvious, setting it right in front of us for everyone to see. So that could be one reason, because sometimes, hopefully I'm going to try to avoid this, but I'm human. I might not make it plain sometimes. But sometimes the person speaking might fail to make the cross plain. If you don't really hear the message of the cross, it will seem boring to you. The second reason is this. Sometimes I'm a fool. Sometimes the reason that it seems boring to me is actually in me. I am buying into. We're going to talk about this word a lot today because it occurs in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Foolishness. The message of the cross will seem like foolishness if I am thinking in the way the world thinks, the wisdom of the world. So we're going to look at that. So here's my two illustrations, and for these illustrations, I'm going to ask you some very random questions, all right? Questions about power outlets and paychecks. Ready? Here is a power outlet. Do you have these in your house? Yes, we all do now. Okay. Do you ever get bored of plugging things into a power outlet? Well, you would respond to me, that's a weird question to ask. I don't even think about it, right? I'm not bored or not bored by it. I just, whenever I need to get something done, I plug into the power outlet, and then my blender works, my TV works, my blow dryer works, right? I just plug, it's not, what do you mean, am I bored? Okay? This is how the cross actually is. It's not the actual message of the cross is not the kind of thing you could ever get bored of, because it is, Paul is going to say, it's the power of God. It's something we plug into. It's something we focus on in order that the power of God would flow in our lives. How could you get bored of that? You'd only get bored of it if you're not doing it. If someone was constantly talking to you about power outlets, but you had never plugged anything in, you'd never used any electricity, you would be bored out of your mind, right? You got to, look at this. You got to I was telling you how to do it. You got to put the big one on this side and the little one on this side. And you'd never plugged anything in. Would that be boring? Yes, it would be desperately boring. So it might be, if you are hearing the message of the cross and it seems boring to you, it could be that you've never plugged in. You've never used that message in your life. It will then seem boring, very boring. Second question, what about your paycheck? Okay, you get a paycheck if you work, maybe once a month, maybe twice a month, yeah? Do they still hand it to you? Anybody get an actual physical check? No, but that's a good image, right? It just shows up in your bank account. You get the notification. Is it boring when you get paid? But it happens every 2 weeks. It's the same thing over and over and over. How can it not be boring? It's not boring because it has power attached to it. If you were getting paid, but you could not, something was wrong, right? You couldn't access that money. You got paid every 2 weeks, but your bank account was broken, your debit card didn't work, and you would just be frustrated by getting paid. Ugh, I can't get to it. This is just like the cross. If you hear about it over and over again, but you are not putting the cross into action in your life, then you're not receiving the power. And of course, it will be boring. But the cross is not like learning more math or whatever other subject you might be interested in. It is the kind of thing we come to again and again because it is the power of God. And if you experience it in that way, it will never be boring to you again. Our series for the next 6 weeks is going to be Easter Explained. And so I debated over this title because I don't love it. It actually sounds kind of boring, the title, to me. Easter Explained. But this word has the word plain in it. And as I said to you, that is Paul's focus in these letters, is that the cross would not be some confusing thing, but that he would make it very clear, very plain, very simple, very straightforward, and easy to get to. So that's what we mean when I'm saying Easter Explained, and that's our goal in this series. I'll read you just 3 different verses from the letters of the Corinthians, to the Corinthians, that we will be focusing on in this series. 2 of them we'll look at today, but then we'll look at again and again. This one we looked at earlier already. It is 1 Corinthians 1:18. It's our memory verse for the next 3 weeks. You can say it in your mind if you already know it, but it's this. Paul opens up and he says, the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. To those who are not connected to God, who are not coming back to a relationship with God through the cross seems foolish. It seems just ridiculous and boring. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. The message of the cross, not even just the cross itself, but the message of the cross is the power of God. We'll see what he means by that. What I received, I passed on to you. This is later in 1 Corinthians, and this will be our second memory verse later in the series. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. So notice here that the cross and resurrection always go together. So when Paul talks about the cross, he's never only talking about Jesus dying on the cross. He's always talking about the fact that Jesus died, he was buried, and on the 3rd day he came back to life and defeated death. It's all one thing. And then this is a verse we'll look at today as well, and you'll just see how focused Paul is. He says this to a particular church, the Corinthian church. He says, when I was with you, I resolved to know nothing except Jesus Christ and him crucified. When he was with this church, which was for a long time, over a year, probably something like a year and a half in that first stretch, he is saying he didn't teach them anything else. All he did when he preached, when he taught, when he went and did home Bible studies, the only thing he did was talk about the cross over and over and over again. Why? Because it is the power of God. So those 3 verses will kind of focus our series here, Easter Explained. And today we will open up with a message about the cross breaking the world, breaking the wisdom and the intelligence of the world, which is how Paul begins in the first chapter of his letter to the Corinthians. So let's talk about, he opens up talking about the world and its wisdom. So in this chapter, so we're in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 today, and in this chapter there's going to be a lot about the wisdom of the world, okay? And then there's going to be a lot about the wisdom of God. And the wisdom of God is the cross. It is demonstrated in the cross. The wisdom of God is like the cross. And he's going to contrast those two, right? The wisdom of God and the wisdom of the world. But as we read this, I want you to think about, is the wisdom of the world bad? That's a difficult question. We'll read this first section and then we'll talk about it a little bit, use some illustrations. The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. That's how he begins. For it is written, and then he quotes Isaiah. This is a quotation from the prophet Isaiah. God is saying this. God says, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Right there, you might ask yourself a question. Why would God do that? Isn't wisdom a good thing? Why would God destroy the wisdom of wise people? And isn't it good to be intelligent and figure things out? Why would God destroy the intelligence of the intelligent people? Where is the wise person? Paul continues. Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Hasn't God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Okay, what is he saying here? He's saying that all the wisdom of the world, all the knowledge that we've come up with, all the strategies, didn't allow human beings to recognize Jesus when he showed up. And so, God, through the foolishness of what was preached, is going to save those who believe. What is the foolishness of what is preached? Simply the cross. It appears foolish to those who don't understand it. And then he says this, Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. All right. We're going to say a couple of things about this because I think this section is a little bit hard to understand for most people. Now, Paul has got this, he's got this tension. He was a really smart guy, and he's trying to make the cross plain to everyone. He's trying to make the cross understandable. But then he says things that sometimes are very deep and hard to grasp at first, perhaps. So let's talk about the world's wisdom for a minute. What is the world's wisdom? And I'll say two things about it, I guess, to start off. The world's wisdom, it always seeks visible success. And the world's wisdom says, I did it all by myself. All right? So what do I mean by those things? What Paul is talking about when he says the world's wisdom is just human beings have the ability to think and reason and figure things out, right? Now, we sometimes mess that up, but we have that ability, and we should use that ability. And so what we do is we try to figure out, okay, here we live in the world here, so we want to do better in life. So what works, right? That's all of science is based around that question. How does the world actually work, and what will succeed if I do it? What will not succeed, right? So The world's wisdom seeks visible success. If you are going to learn from someone how to do something, you want to be taught by someone who has succeeded at that, right? Like if you're going to learn how to go become a doctor, or you're going to learn how to invest your money, you want to learn from someone who has succeeded at being a doctor, right? Not someone who just says they're a doctor or made some stuff up. You want to learn from someone with experience and success. Hey, I've healed all these people. Learn from me. Or with money, if you want to learn how to invest, you want to learn from someone who's broke or someone who has a lot of money. Well, they better have a lot of money, right? They must have succeeded. Otherwise, what they're doing isn't going to work. So as I explain this, and you start to think about what is the world's wisdom, recognize that the wisdom of the world is not a bad thing. What Paul is saying here, he's contrasting it with God's wisdom. Okay, he's going to say God's wisdom comes and destroys the wisdom of the world. You might be tempted to think the wisdom of the world is a bad thing, but it's not. Is it a good thing to learn how to do things well? Yeah, it is. It is whatever your area of work is, it's a good thing to learn how that area functions and be good at what you do. When he talked earlier about the wisdom of the Greeks, right? All that wisdom was basically learning the beginnings of science and then learning how to do things in a way that actually succeeds. You know, how do you build a giant temple or a giant building that doesn't fall down? How do you make an army that can stay put together and not scatter across the field? How do you heal people? Medicine, all these different areas of knowledge are good things. The world's wisdom is a good thing, but Paul is saying that the wisdom of God comes in and destroys it. Why in the world would that be? The world's wisdom is a good thing, but it also tempts us to this. It tempts us to say, I did it all by myself. If I've learned something and I become good at it, I might start to think of myself very highly and think that I don't need help, that I don't, in fact, need God. And that's the danger of the world's wisdom. You can see that all around us today, right? Science has gone so far in our age that many people think God is kind of an obsolete thing. We don't really need God anymore. We've got, all of this engineering and technological marvels in the world. So this is the danger of the world's wisdom. So worldly wisdom alone, if it's the center of life, worldly wisdom alone turns into loving the world, which, as we saw back in our series on John, loving the world in the negative sort of way that John describes it is a very bad thing, right? The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Okay, let's continue a little bit, and I'll use a couple of illustrations here. These illustrations are aimed to get at the difference between the world's wisdom and God's wisdom, so we can understand this part of the Bible better. There are two ways to make any statement in life. Have you ever had one of those moments, maybe you were in university or something like that, and somebody said something where they were trying to sound really smart, and so they used a whole bunch of really big words to say something that's very simple? Let me give you two statements, and we'll contrast them. Okay, here's the first statement. The redemptive work of Christ effectuates the reconciliation of morally compromised humanity to a holy God through substitutionary atonement. Now, is that statement true? Well, most of you will say, yes, maybe if you understand what it means, you'll say it's absolutely true. Okay? Now, here's a second statement that says the exact same thing as this statement. Okay? Here it is. Jesus saves sinners. Okay? Those two statements mean exactly the same thing. They mean the same thing. And here's part of Paul's point. The wisdom of the world is kind of like this. It's kind of like this. It's human effort. It's detailed. It's all our power. It's complicated. The wisdom of God is kind of like this. It's very plain. It's very simple. It changes lives at a deep level. Okay, that's one illustration. Let me give you another illustration. Wisdom of God versus wisdom of the world. Remember, the wisdom of the world is not necessarily bad, right? Like when I say this statement is not necessarily bad, unless you're saying it just to sound really smart. Okay, then maybe that's a bad thing. But it's precise. It's not necessarily bad. Let me give you an example of two different men. Okay, here's one. Here's one guy. This is a young to middle-aged guy. He's got his Ferrari. He's got his designer clothes. You know, he's at the top of his game. I don't know what he is. Maybe he's a lawyer. Maybe he's a businessman, something like that. And he is the epitome of visible success. Everyone who sees him thinks, wow, this guy is amazing. But the truth is, underneath all that, he's actually broke. And all of his investments fell apart, and he's just pretending. It's just all a front. Okay, here's another guy who drives like sort of a regular sedan, kind of minivan. Older guy, lives in a regular house. He's not famous in any way. Nobody really knows him. But he's got this work from home, multi-million-dollar empire that nobody really knows about. The wisdom of the world is kind of like this. It's focused on visible success. The wisdom of God is more like this. It's often hidden. It's often not apparent when you first look at it from a distance. Okay, let me give you actually two more illustrations. This series is going to be full of illustrations. What is God's wisdom like? God's wisdom is like a leaf or like dirt. What in the world do I mean by that? Well, if you look at a leaf, at first glance, it's nothing special, right? It's all over the place. There's leaves in the fall. They fall in the spring. They come back out on the trees. We're so used to them that they're nothing to us. In fact, a lot of times they are just something to be cleaned up and gotten out of the way. But if you were to look carefully at a leaf, of course, what do you find? I thought I had another leaf picture. But if you were to zoom in on a leaf and actually study and carefully pay attention to what's happening inside this leaf, you will find a miracle of God, something of astonishing complexity and mind-boggling goodness inside a leaf. This is what the wisdom of God is like. We can say the same thing about dirt, right? What could be more despised than dirt? Nobody likes to be dirty. Dirt's just, we just walk on it, step on it. But the truth is that dirt that grows crops is one of the most astonishingly complex, designed things in the universe. All life is. But it is a miracle of God. So the wisdom of God often appears to be foolishness at first. It appears to be just, that just is, or whatever, or it's something that is of no value. And yet, when we look closely, we think carefully about it. This is the cross. If we spend our time over these next 6 weeks really placing the cross in front of us and using its power, it will be for us the power of God. Even though to most of the world, the cross just looks like foolishness. That's useless. It's nothing. This is what Paul is saying. Let's continue here. Another illustration. What is the cross like? I used this Monopoly illustration a while ago. I'm going to try to use as many illustrations as I can, and maybe some of them will click with you better than others. The cross and God's wisdom is kind of like this. Let's say you and your friends were all playing Monopoly, and you were so into the game of Monopoly that you forgot about the whole rest of the world outside of the game. You got into it, you were gripped by it, who's going to win, who's going to pass go, who's going to land on boardwalk. You were so gripped by it, and you actually your competition was so intense, you started actually kind of mistreating each other. You're trying to manipulate each other, and winning the game was the most important thing that you could possibly imagine. And then somebody came over to your house you didn't know, a stranger. And he came in and he sat down and he started playing Monopoly with you, only he played Monopoly all wrong. Everything he did was wrong. He gave away properties when he landed on them sometimes. It seemed like he would give away money to people who were almost about to go bankrupt. It seemed like he was trying to lose the game. It was backwards. And yet, somehow, something about this stranger people started to like him. They started to like him for some reason, and he changed, he made people think outside the game. They weren't only thinking about winning anymore. And then the stranger actually went bankrupt in the Monopoly. He went bankrupt because he was playing all wrong. He didn't play by the rules. He was doing foolish things. But you know what crazy happened is he went bankrupt, and then other people gave him money to bring him back in the game. And in the end, somehow he landed on all the right spaces. He ended up winning the game. He played completely wrong, and he won. And after the game was over, nobody was mad at him. Everybody's happy with him. And it ended up being this amazing experience. That's what Jesus is like. He played the game totally backwards. Now, as we look through this next section, think about that illustration and look what he says about us in the world and about Jesus. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Therefore, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. The cross teaches us to boast in the Lord. He continues in chapter 2 talking about the power of God. Skip through this a little bit. Chapter 2, he continues talking about the power of God. And so it was with me, brothers and sisters, when I came to you, he says. I did not come with eloquence or with human wisdom as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness, with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but they were with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. Okay, so what does he mean by this? He came to them and he resolved to know nothing. I alluded to this verse earlier. When Paul was with this church, he's saying he just talked about the cross the whole time. He didn't try to make it fancy. He tried to make it as plain as possible. He tried not to do it with really fancy language or in the ways that the world would do things. He didn't construct a system to get people to become Christians. He simply talked about the cross over and over again. What is going on here? If we're going to think about this whole chapter, you could think about it like this. The wisdom of the world is not necessarily a bad thing. But when I focus on how do I do things better, what works, what succeeds in life, sometimes I forget about God. That becomes the center of my life. And so what God does is he comes in with a completely different kind of wisdom. Like this person who joined your Monopoly game, Jesus enters the world and he plays life backwards. He gives away all his money. He doesn't have a place to live. He seems to have no real plan for how he's going to take over the world or defeat evil. In fact, it turns out his plan is he's going to die on a cross. And everyone who looks at that says that's foolish, that makes no sense. That's not going to succeed at all. And yet somehow he wins the game. Somehow he dies. He actually dies. And then he comes back to life from the dead. And he does so. He defeats death in that moment. He wins it all. He makes a way for human beings to come back to God. But not only that, he shows us a different kind of wisdom. There's something deeper than just figuring out your life and figuring out how to do it the best way possible. The deeper thing is that you must trust the Lord. You must have faith in God. That is the deep wisdom revealed by the cross. You must, in fact, lay down your life. You must give up trying to control it and making even decisions really about your own life. You must give all that over to Him and follow Him even when it doesn't make sense. And that wisdom is the wisdom of God. The message of the cross itself is the wisdom of God. What Paul is saying is that if that is in the center of your life, that wisdom can actually defeat all of this sin and evil that's in the world. You know, the wisdom of the world doesn't really succeed, right? We might look at our world and think, oh, our world is so amazing. We got the AI now, and we've got computers, and we've got cars, and we've got airplanes, and we have all these amazing things. And yet, if you look at the news, or even your own life and the people around you, you know that really human beings have all the same deep problems we've always had, don't we? None of these amazing, have these things improved the world? Okay, yes, it's great that we can go to the hospital and we die less often. That's great. Hallelujah. But the wisdom of the world has not in any way solved the deepest problems of human beings. And that's the point. Only the wisdom of God, the wisdom that is displayed in the cross of Jesus Christ, only that wisdom can defeat the real problems of human beings. And so Paul is saying, he's saying it's so much better than the wisdom of the world that really what we need to do, at least some of the time, is just get rid of all that other stuff. All the other, here's how I need to live my life. We need to just wipe it all off the table. Almost like we're playing Monopoly and we just clear the board right off the table. And we need to take time to focus very carefully on the message of the cross itself. That message, he says, is the power of God. I think I'll wrap up with this. And, you know, I'm not sure how this message is landing with you today. I would encourage you to keep on digging in as we go through this next 6 weeks, because this really does take a lot of focus. The cross needs to be made plain in front of your mind. But I'll finish with this. He says his message in preaching to these Corinthians was not with wise and persuasive words, but he demonstrated the Spirit's power. I used to think, what does that mean? Does it mean he did a bunch of miracles or something like that? And he says again in the last line there in verse 5, he says, he wanted their faith to rest on God's power. And again, for a long time, I thought, maybe Paul is saying he went to this church and he did a bunch of miracles. He showed them how powerful God is in these dramatic ways in order that their faith would be real. But that's not what he's saying at all. Because Paul has already told us what is the power of God. Do you remember our memory verse? The message of the cross is the power of God. So when Paul says that he gave them a demonstration of the Spirit's power, this might seem crazy to you. Here's what he means is he talked about the cross over and over and over and over again until some of those people in that church started to live the cross in their lives. And that released God's power in their life. And then their faith truly rested on the cross and on God's wisdom. We'll pause there for today. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you so much for who you are. Thank you for all that you've given us in this world, and that you've given us the ability to figure many things out on our own and work hard and learn. But none of our own abilities are enough. None of our own abilities are enough to solve the things that are deeply wrong with us. And so thank you that you came into the world and you destroyed the wisdom of the wise and the intelligence of the intelligent. Thank you that you brought your wisdom, the wisdom of God, the true wisdom into the world through the cross of Jesus. And it's my prayer during this series and as we lead up to Easter that every one of us would be able to see the cross for what it really is, and would be able to live our lives more like the cross. Would you show us each how to do that? And as we do it, would you release your power into our lives? In Jesus' name, amen.